Vanquish. Vanquish is sort of awesome. It's one of those games where you stumble back on it after a few years of it collecting dust, you revisit it again, and as you play it, you kind of realize it might be the best game ever made. It's one of those games. Released in 2010 by Platinum Games, Vanquish was a third-person shooter released only for the 360 and the PS3. Luckily, in 2017, the game was given a belated PC port, albeit a very good one, with 4K support and an uncapped frame rate, which is how I was finally able to play the game. Also, a quick note for developers, keep the PC ports of old games coming. I do not mind seeing last-gen titles ported over to PC, or in this case, a last-gen title. I'm totally fine so long as it's just a good port. I'm really happy with this recent push to get a lot of old console games onto PC. I support it 100%. I mean, were it not for this PC release, I would never have become a fan of Vanquish in the first place. I'd always heard good things about it, although it never seemed to quite get mainstream attention, especially compared to Platinum's other games. Vanquish is also one of their very early games, coming out like a year after the first Bayonetta. As far as I'm concerned, it's up there as one of the best games they've ever made, at least by my standards.
San Francisco is gone now!
That was for the good of all Americans.
Yet it's kind of a forgotten classic. If I remember correctly, it didn't even break 1 million units when it first launched. Either way, I've constantly gone back to this game over and over throughout the years, each time gaining even more an appreciation for it. So I think today we'll do just that. Revisit a 7th gen classic that definitely deserves a second chance from those who missed it the first time. This is Vanquish. The game is set in the near future, with the US and Russia still vying for power and resources. With resources getting low on Earth, as well as apparently an overpopulation crisis, the US decides to build a solar-powered space colony called Providence, the 51st state. In Russia, thanks to the energy crisis, a military coup takes over and forms a brand new regime, the Order of the Russian Star. They have advanced robot tech that puts them in direct conflict with the West. So out of the blue, they invade and commandeer Providence Station, using its solar energy to create a beam of solar radiation that wipes San Francisco off the map, prompting the US to respond and take back the station. That's the basic premise. From there, it's a pretty standard plot with some twists and turns that you can kinda see coming from a mile away. The game takes inspiration from a lot of franchises too. Right away, the first cutscene in the game feels ripped straight out of Gundam. The space colony design is an O'Neill cylinder, just like in Gundam. Even the premise of a breakaway nation using a space colony to commit an atrocity on Earth, instigating a war, is identical to Gundam's premise. I guess the only difference is instead of giant mechs, we're using human-sized power armor. Also, the colony only wipes out San Francisco, instead of half the world's population like in Gundam. Although I've never seen any developer fully acknowledging this. I think it's too similar to be a coincidence, but what do I know? Another big inspiration, apparently the main inspiration, as said by director of the game Shinji Mikami, was the 1973 anime Kashan. You can kind of see it in the main character. The main protagonist is Sam Gideon, a member of DARPA, who has developed a high-tech augmented reaction suit. I always thought that Sam was sort of the equivalent of a test pilot or something, but according to the lore, he actually helped design and create the suit himself. I'm not exactly sure if that's how things work at DARPA in our world, but hey, it's the future. Things have time to change. Sam is helped along the way by Elena Ivanova, who is essentially the game's equivalent of Cortana. She narrates to you about technobabble, she helps you through doorways and lifts, and she also has a short skirt that the camera always loves to catch a glimpse of during her cutscenes. God bless you, Platinum. The other person Sam spends the entire game with is Robert Burns and his squadron of Marines. And Burns himself is voiced, of course, by the legendary Steve Blum.
Drag your sorry ass into battle.
Either way, the story itself is pretty basic. Going from point A to point B, securing LZs, taking down robots, with a little bit of cutscene sprinkled in here every now and then. I'll get more into the plot later. So the first thing you notice about Vanquish is that it's a third-person cover shooter, which shouldn't be surprising given the era that it came out. This was right in the middle of Gears fever. Every game that wasn't ripping off Call of Duty ripped off Gears of War. So your character sticks to chest-high cover, you can peek out and aim at enemies, you can also blind fire. Pretty basic stuff. However, Vanquish includes some very different mechanics compared to any other third-person shooter out there. Sliding and slow-mo. You don't sprint in this game, you fucking slide. With jet engines built into your thighs, you can drop down and zoom across the level in seconds, flanking enemies, running to weapons or cover, or charging at a particular tough enemy to take them down. Which then leads right into the second big inclusion, bullet time. With enough energy charged up, you can activate slow-mo by performing any number of actions. Aiming while you're sliding activates it, meleeing an enemy will automatically activate it too, and it'll drain all your energy. Taking a lot of damage and getting put on low health automatically activates it too, so long as you have energy left. And like another famous bullet time action game, Vanquish lets you choose between 3 weapons, which is pretty great. I accept the 2 weapon limit in other games, but having 3 I feel gives far more room to experiment with your playstyle. Vanquish unfortunately doesn't have as good weapons to justify it. It's got a pretty standard arsenal, all things considered, an assault rifle which you'll never get rid of, shotgun, sniper, rocket launcher. Then you have some of the weird stuff, like an LFE gun, which fires a slow-moving energy orb that knocks enemies down, or a saw blade launcher, or a lock-on laser. Which, unfortunately, as cool as a lot of these sound, they just are kind of a letdown, especially thanks to their low damage. The reason I never bothered with any of these is because I'd waste my entire ammo fighting a small group of enemies, and then that'd be it. Like the saw blade launcher does fuck all damage. I have no idea why you'd even pick it up. Although after the game released, Platinum later added a DLC pack to Vanquish, which included 3 brand new extra guns. A boost machine gun, which I think is literally just a heavy machine gun but can penetrate armor, a laser that has no ammo but it uses your energy to fire instead, and an anti-armor pistol, which is legit the best gun in the entire game. I'm not even joking. It has insane accuracy, great penetration through armor, you can one-shot most enemies, kill bosses in a single magazine, and there are a lot of boss fights that involve you waiting for their vulnerable weak spot to be revealed. With the anti-armor pistol, even if their weak spot is covered in armor, you can completely bypass that, since this thing will puncture through most surfaces in the game, meaning that you can wipe the floor with pretty much anything the game throws at you. I think the devs realize this because they barely give you any ammo for it, but if you can get it enough upgrades, then this thing legit becomes an exploit. I think my problem with the weapons is that a lot of them do feel good to use, but the rest are just so questionable that I never bothered with them. My loadout for the whole game was an assault rifle, an anti-armor pistol, and then occasionally a shotgun that I would swap out for other stuff, maybe. I pretty much had this loadout from start to finish, because they were all the guns I needed. Like, I'd find a decent lock-on rocket launcher every now and then, but after a few shots it would just run out of ammo, so I'd swap back. Guns like the heavy machine gun are just straight up useless now. You can either go with the boost machine gun or stick with the assault rifle, which is what I did. You're constantly given so much ammo for it, it ends up being the highest upgraded gun in your arsenal. So of course you'd never get rid of it. I feel a full rebalance of the weapons might have been in order. Focus less on the machine guns, add some more middle tier situational weapons, and make the weird one-off weapons way more damaging or powerful. Honestly, I don't mind how the rocket launcher only has a few rockets in it when you pick it up. It does a lot of damage, but you can only use it for one encounter. Then you gotta swap it out for something else. That's good balance. The problem is that the rest of the guns are too weak to actually be meaningful. I like the LFE gun, I think that's the only other useful gun in the game, but the saw blade launcher is useless, the lock-on laser is too finicky to use. Again, Vanquish just needed a whole rebalance with its guns. Make these guns super powerful and do lots of damage, but limit their ammo dramatically. Encourage the player to swap to one, use it all up, and then swap to another power weapon. However, as I say this, I'm realizing just why this mentality of constantly swapping out weapons doesn't quite mesh well with Vanquish. And that all has to do with the upgrade system, which, yeah, let's dive into that and all the problems it brings. It's a very simple mechanic. Every now and then you'll find an upgrade chip. Picking it up will upgrade the weapon you're holding by 1 level. Another way to upgrade weapons is by picking up a weapon that you already have. You see, if you pick up a gun that you're already carrying, you refill all your ammo for that one gun. But if you already have full ammo, that gun you're carrying gets upgraded 1/3 of a level. So essentially, if you have an assault rifle at full ammo capacity, you pick up 3 assault rifles in a level, that's a free upgrade. And obviously, the more upgrades you get, the better stats the gun will be. Slightly better damage, higher range, faster rate of fire, even some really important stats like magazine size and ammo count. You can literally double the ammo storage for a gun by getting it to the max level. It's a heavily flawed system, because if you give it a second to think about, you can already see 2 big flaws with it. The first one is obvious. The gun you want to be upgraded the most is going to be the one you're using the most, which means that that gun is going to be the one constantly out of ammo. But the gun you can upgrade and are able to upgrade is just going to be the gun that's at full ammo, which probably means it's the one you're not using. It's literally making players not use a gun just to upgrade it. That's the complete opposite of how it should be. But thank goodness, because I'm sure enough people have realized how easy it is to exploit this system. And it's a pretty blatant one too. One that I'm so shocked at, I have to assume the developers knew about it, because there is no way this got through testing. Every single gun that you pick up in a level, either randomly spawning in the mission or randomly dropped by an enemy, will have full ammo when you pick it up, no matter what. Yeah, you see the problem here? So the strategy, I kid you not, No matter what you do, if you see a gun that you already have in your loadout, first, find another gun, one that you don't even want to keep. Swap out the gun you want to upgrade with that gun, then go to the brand new gun, pick that up, then pick up your old gun, which is probably out of ammo, and bam, that's a free upgrade. It is a pretty hilarious oversight, although on the hard difficulty, this strat is pretty much a requirement if you want to make it through the game alive. You need those upgrades as fast as you can get them, because they make a huge difference against the tougher enemies. Honestly, the upgrade system becomes its own worst enemy in the late game, since most of your guns will likely be so far upgraded, which means that you're not going to want to swap them out to a brand new level 1 gun. Seriously, players are just discouraged from picking up new weapons. This is just a flawed upgrade system. To me, it feels a little tacked on as well, and I'd be curious to know how the game would play either without it, or with a more modified process of upgrading your gear. Maybe things like challenges or skill points, I don't know. All I'm saying is, don't use a system that discourages players from using guns they want to upgrade. That's like the complete opposite of how it should be. Honestly, I think Vanquish probably could do without it too. That'd at least let players experiment with new weapons or loadouts, even into the late game, and ensure that they're on an even playing field. It was 2010. Since then, we've had loads of FPS games tackle weapon upgrades pretty well, but I still think Vanquish should have at least done another pass at the drawing board when handling theirs. Either way, I don't think most people who think fondly back to Vanquish ever really think back to the gun balancing. Rather, it's all about sliding and slow-mo. I also feel I need to dispel a common myth about Vanquish, which stems from people calling it a movement shooter, which it is not. A movement shooter is a game that encourages constant, movement. Never stopping. Oftentimes you're in the air, jumping, dodging, sliding, strafing. And Vanquish does have some of that. Even combined with the slow-mo, you'd think that this game would be a super fast-paced balls-to-the-wall movement shooter. Except it isn't. It's still fast, but it's not quite a full-blown arena shooter. Vanquish is a little different, and it does take some getting used to, especially if you go into it expecting something way more arena-focused. The game kind of encourages you to engage in a particular loop, to break from cover, cause chaos until you're low on energy or health, then retreat and wait for it to recharge back. It is a cover shooter. That's a mechanic that should not be ignored, but nor is it to be overused. In fact, a lot of areas in the game will straight up punish you for hiding behind cover for too long. Cover is treated almost like a pit stop in between insane rushes out into combat. It's there for you to recharge, maybe pick off an enemy here or there, and then let you run back into the action, or more likely slide into it. This game is all about pushing forward, making the most of the energy you have left, and then diving back into cover to recharge. You have a limited amount of energy. Sure, it recharges, but it depletes very quickly. Something as simple as kicking an enemy, that'll drain your entire energy meter, which as it's recharging, you are completely vulnerable. And if you don't pay attention, you'll die right away. Your health is also displayed on your suit, green for full health, yellow for injured, and red for close to death. And you also have very limited health, to the point where even a basic enemy can kill you if they get the jump on you. Like them being able to melee you or get a good few shots off on you, that shit can put you in the red right away. Health is a little interesting here, in that it's separate to your energy, but both of them seem to be tied together in multiple instances. For example, if you have full energy and you're brought down to low health, you're automatically put into slow-mo until your energy runs out, mainly to let you retreat back to cover or kill whoever was shooting at you. Then you have to let your health and your energy recharge at the same time. Energy lets you slide and do bullet time, so it's pretty important to manage if you want to stay alive. And making sure you don't run out becomes a big factor of the gameplay. You'll always be eyeing this energy bar right here, making sure you use up as much as you can without fully depleting it. And in this regard, Vanquish has one of the most unique combat loops I've ever seen for a shooter. It's not movement focused like people think. Sure, if you're super reckless it can be, but then you'll constantly be left vulnerable and needing to recharge in the middle of a firefight, which will just end up killing you. On the flip side, it's not a full-blown cover shooter. It's got some of those elements, but it encourages you to move forward and flank enemies. So I can genuinely say that I've never seen a game quite like it. I think the combat and the gameplay style takes a bit of getting used to, but once you get into it, you really get into it. Honestly, in this regard, you can really feel Platinum's fingerprints, because they're the guys behind Bayonetta, which is all about things like chaining combos and attacks. When revisiting Vanquish, I could totally feel that gameplay style weave its way into the gunplay. You aren't just picking off enemies one by one. You're chaining together different moves and strategies the same way you would chain together multiple combos. Stuff like sliding forward, slow-mo precision aiming, using up your melee and getting a short period of time before your energy runs out. This is combined with knowing when to back off and retreat to avoid damage. The entire game is this cycle, and you're essentially making combos out of the gunplay. It's why I think when you watch videos of Vanquish, the combat looks super intense and and fast-paced, when in reality, playing it feels pretty simple. It doesn't really feel that intense when you're playing it. It kind of feels like you're just in the zone. And it's also why Vanquish is a sandbox in the first place, not just a generic cover shooter with generic copy-paste enemies. The game needs to have all these different elements and enemies to react to on the fly, the same way a Bayonetta game needs multiple attacks and combos. Because that's a type of action Platinum excelled at. Action that gives players a variety of moves to use and the freedom to choose when to use them. And with that mindset, you can really understand why Vanquish is the way it is. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I might be. But Vanquish feels so different to me than any other shooter I've ever played, and understanding the people who made it certainly helped. But of course, no Platinum game is complete without having a good enemy roster. And Vanquish has robots. Lots and lots of robots. Most of the game you'll be fighting robots, and you know what? They're fun enemies to fight. There's a lot of variety, even in basic grunts. You can tell their rank by their color scheme, but even the low-level red guys can kill you fast if you aren't careful. So an entire squad of them are fucking scary. They exhibit some solid AI too. All I know is that in the middle of a battle, I never had to resort to classic Gears of War style hiding behind cover and peeking up. The enemies were dynamic, they pushed forward, they flanked, they gave openings for me to do the exact same thing against them. Also, throughout the game, you encounter so fucking many different enemy designs. Way too many for me to count. A lot of the enemies you face start off as bosses or maybe mini bosses, but then they just straight up become recurring enemy types. These giant transforming mechs that go from walking on all fours to 2 legs are encountered early on, but then they just start showing up again as a recurring mini-boss. There are a bunch of ways to defeat them too. You take out their limbs, knock them down, maybe do a quick time event, or shoot at their core from afar. And these are just one enemy design too. There are these tanks with saw blades, these small rolling balls, as well as these little robots that can form as cover for their robot allies. Multiple big robots too, like this scary Decepticon looking dude, and this guy, who can transform into like a scorpion, and he sort of reminds me of like a Bionicle. And so many too. These designs are downright inspired. Seriously, look at this guy. This goofy little robot dude who runs around on 2 legs, but can control all this junk and scrap around him to attack you in multiple forms. I legit can't even think of another game that even comes close to this. Plenty of boss fights as well, which is par for the course for Platinum. Some of them are pretty hard, but I still had fun with them. I wasn't a fan of the quick time events, but the rest of the action is really good. And every enemy type seems very well balanced, even on hard difficulty. I think it's just the sheer uniqueness for all of these different designs, which in turn all have different ways required to kill them. So having these large arenas mixing them up feels great to play. Some enemies even pilot vehicles too, like walkers or transport ships. And if you're able to knock a guy off his mech, you're able to pilot that as well. Every time you go through a level or an arena, it plays completely differently depending on your strategy. Hey, it's why I revisit Vanquish as much as I do. The levels in Vanquish are pretty good. They have some generic third-person cover shooter cliches, but the game is able to spice things up when it's feeling a little stale, by adding a unique set piece or a huge arena jam-packed with enemies. Again, 2010 cover shooter. It's obligatory that you have your chest-high walls in blown-out concrete buildings and ruins. A good chunk of the levels are flat too, where they'll only have a tiny bit of verticality from enemies, maybe on an upper level shooting down at you. A lot of the areas in this game look kinda like this. And in Vanquish's defense, each arena itself is pretty open. Like, you're never funneled down a single tight corridor. Instead, these sections can be quite big and spacious. You're easily able to move around and flank past enemies. But every now and then, the game throws a completely breathtaking, massive set piece at you. Usually in these huge AI battles with seemingly dozens of robots all shooting down at your marine buddies. Some of these sections make great use of verticality too. There's areas where enemies are perched at the top of a big sloped hill and it feels like fucking Robot D-Day. It's great stuff. A lot of other levels have really neat gimmicks too, like this one, which is full of moving conveyor belts with crates to hide behind while enemies are shooting at you. There's some good on-rail sections that are super detailed. Like, seriously, look at the speed at which we're going. Look at that moving skybox. This is all being rendered in real time, and it genuinely is still impressive even over a decade later. There's also this really awesome level whose concept is similar to one I described in my Halo Infinite video, when I talked about the kinds of levels that Infinite needed, where it's this huge, massive battle, tanks everywhere, everywhere, big draw distance with tons of enemies. Then you board an enemy ship, destroying everything inside as you work your way up before eventually taking it down for good. It's a good microcosm of the entire game. A variety of set pieces and environments, little individual arenas with their own gimmicks, amazing boss battles, and just insane firefights with so many enemies on screen. That's another great thing the levels do. You really feel like you're in an all-out war. Seeing all these ships fire at each other, dropships flying by, entire tank battalions shooting at each other, it's an incredible feat that the game runs as well as it does. I'm as shocked as you are that this game didn't cause Xboxes to explode in 2010. And in terms of length, the game is a solid 6 hours, but every hour is jam-packed full of massive arenas and super intricate set pieces. They're all pretty memorable too, and the game's faster pace ensures that the levels don't get stale, because the game gives you just enough time to appreciate a section before throwing you into the next mission. I do get why people complain about the length. However, were this game doubled in its playtime, I worry that it would just slow it down and give the player that sense of boredom that you often get when a game overstays its welcome, or any particular mission might start to drag on. It's a short game, but it has a fucking great pace. Small little moments to catch your breath, listen to dialogue, grab weapons, in between super intense fighting. It's probably why the game is as addicting as it is. The devs also made sure to add in a little bit of visual variety between each mission, so that they all stand out from one another. I think it works most of the time. If I had to summarize this game's visuals, it would be peak 7th gen, both in the good and kind of the bad. Everything about this game is a stark reminder that this was made in the era of the 360 and the PS3. Heavy bloom, muddy, grimy textures, strong color tinting, lots of browns, oranges, and grays, destroyed, bombed out cities, chest-high concrete walls. This is a very distinctly 7th gen looking game. It was right around the time games stopped using colors, and right before they learned to get them back. There's just a bloom-heavy haze over Vanquish, with some very strong color tinting. It's not as bad as a lot of other games like Gears of War, but it's still pretty noticeable. And it's by far the one thing that makes the game look as dated as it does, which is a shame, because beneath it are some very nice environments and solid art direction. Having the game in HD has definitely helped with the image clarity, but it still has that 7th gen overexposure. I don't know how else to describe it, just there's something off with it. So if you aren't a fan of this particular era of 3D graphics, you may not like it. And honestly, I don't really care because I have played so many other games with a far worse color palette than Vanquish. I also think it varies from level to level. Some levels look genuinely great, others still look dated, but they might have a nice atmosphere to them. Then some are just kinda bland. I think the color choice is amplified when the environments feel ripped straight out of Gears of War as well. Then the game starts to look a bit bleh. Still, I think Providence Station is pretty great. The entire setting of the game, and man, I think the developers chose an amazing place to set their shooter. I already love seeing gigantic sci-fi megastructures that can also support natural environments with lakes and forests. Hey, it's why I'm a fan of another franchise. And Vanquish's station here does deliver. It's an O'Neill cylinder, which is a fairly common sci-fi concept that is used in a bunch of stuff. But hey, to me, the more the merrier, because I love designs like these. And goddamn, this just leaves me hungry for more, but in a good way. We have massive cityscapes, an interconnected suspended tram system, multiple rivers, lakes, and parks, even some classical looking architecture. It's all good stuff. Remember, the station itself was built amidst an overpopulation crisis for the US, so it's essentially meant to be self-sustaining. It uses solar energy, and it's even able to transmit that excess energy down to the surface. Oh, hey, that's why it has the microwave beam. I thought Uncle Sam just attached WMD to their colony, but it's nice to know that it has an in-world practical explanation. But yeah, for what it's worth, it feels like a dense lived-in city. Very sci-fi, but kind of practical in a way. It's hard to explain. Like everything has a bit of purpose to it, like for the people who would live here, even if there are no civilians left during the fighting. Yeah, this is something that's kind of glossed over, and not even the game's fan wiki is able to explain it. There's supposed to be like millions of people living on this thing, so where are they? I guess they all got out, hopefully. Or died. A majority of this game is spent inside abstract tech corridors, but the details in the environment, or even the amazing skybox, they do a lot to keep you from feeling lost. The world has a strong character to it, and not a lot of games can boast that. It's a shame that it gets blown up in the end, because I would love to have seen it used in future sequels. Because, yeah, the game, even while looking definitely dated, still has some very visually appealing areas and locations. This park area is definitely my favorite. It's very nice, and I feel very peaceful and calm as I shoot these evil robots. or like seeing the city at night, which is very aesthetic. The game actually reminded me a lot of War for Cybertron, not just in its desaturated visuals, but designs as well. I guess I'm just a sucker for sci-fi cities. I'll conclude that Vanquish's visuals are good, if a bit dated. Little hiccups here and there, a lot of 7th gen graphics techniques that don't age that well, but plenty of character in its designs and levels. Good presentation all around. A quick shout out to the music is in order. Vanquish has a fucking incredible soundtrack. Doesn't go for a generic orchestral score. Instead, it goes for really slick and intense techno-industrial. What's funny is that revisiting this game's score has kind of made it sound timeless just to me, entirely due to the fact that I feel like it would belong in some of the old games that I often play for the channel. All those 90s shooters that I play. A game like Slave Zero has music just like this. Yet this is from a 7th gen AAA third-person shooter made by Platinum. So listening back to it, it may sound dated to some people, but to me it ironically sounds even more timeless, just because of how comparable it sounds to old shooters. The soundtrack was composed by 3 composers: Masafumi Takada, Arina Niwa, and Masakazu Sugimori. Sorry if I butchered those names. Niwa did the Bayonetta and Bayonetta 3 soundtracks as well, but Takada, holy shit, he might be one of the most famous Japanese composers in the industry. He's done so much stuff as well. I can't even list it all. Here's just some of the games he's composed. I'm sure you'll all recognize at least some of it. I really love this game's score. It's super intense. It fits the vibe perfectly. I really love how much it leans into the synth as well. It knows it's a sci-fi game and it's having fun with it. There's a really neat post on the Platinum Games blog page with Niwa talking about the score. Apparently Platinum and Shinji Mikami especially, who I mentioned earlier, really wanted the music to stand out and not blend into the background. That was kind of the trend for other third-person shooters at the time. Instead, Platinum wanted the music to stand on its own. The game's combat was also being experimented with, and as it fell into this super fast-paced rhythm, the music kind of had to catch up with it, morphing into this huge blend of techno, industrial, rock, and even some jungle. It's a fun read. I'll have a link down in the description. But yeah, tone-wise, the music carries the whole game, and it works. Because I don't think these grizzled, cheesy one-liners would land as well were it not for the booming techno in the background as I kill colorful, goofy robots. It's a good tone. I probably should talk more about the plot. Vanquish does have a pretty in-depth plot, but like I said, it's a pretty standard affair. I mentioned the game has a lot of influences from other sci-fi franchises, but I actually got a pretty consistent Starship Troopers vibe the entire way through.
Come on, you eight! Wanna live forever!
Like sure, it's all about grizzled space marines, but there's a bit of an uneasy feeling you get with the entire game. Like the wanton death and destruction that you see throughout the game has a bit more of a sinister tone than a standard military action romp. Honestly, there are parts here that feel like they were directed by Paul Verhoeven. I don't know if it was intentional or not. Early on, you run into Professor Candide, who helped design the space colony and who appears to be held hostage by the bad guys, as well as a knockoff ARS suit that is honestly pretty badass looking, seriously. Although you find out that it's piloted by Viktor Zaitsev, the apparent leader of the Order in the first place. The big twist is that Viktor is secretly cooperating in some regard with the US president. This comes halfway through the game, although it's only given to the player, not the characters, so the entire time you're waiting for an inevitable Order 66 style betrayal, specifically by Burns. The entire game paints him like such a dick. He's angry with you for no reason, he willingly leaves men behind. The conflict at first seems to be there because Burns is a properly trained soldier, while Sam is kind of just a scientist turned test pilot, working mostly with DARPA, so he seems to be outside of the regular chain of command.
My orders are classified.
Not when we're on the lines together. I need to know everything you know.
Elena and I do not fall under military jurisdiction, Lieutenant Colonel.
I think what you're trying to say is fuck off.
But yeah, you're pretty much expecting the obligatory twist. And yes, Burns actually has a secret agenda as well, to use the laser that Viktor used on San Francisco, but against Moscow, further flaming the war. Turns out Burns was under orders from the president to use the station in retaliation, thereby creating a global conflict as a way to stimulate the economy. Something that Viktor and the president herself had conspired to do, almost as like an Orwellian way to control the world through their separate militaries locked in an endless war.
Consider it a kind of economic stimulus package.
What? War is not economic stimulus. San Francisco is gone now.
That was for the good of all Americans.
Sam obviously objects to this, eventually getting helped by Candide, who stops the countdown, only to be killed by Burns. The very Marines that helped you the entire game are now your enemies, so you now have to shoot them. Which is kinda sad. You do kill Burns in a boss fight, although in my case it was a little easier than I thought it would be, but the game treats him like some semi-redeemed hero who sacrifices himself to kill even more Marines.
You win, Sam. Now get out of here!
No! We leave together!
Get out of here! That's an order! My men are dead. I belong with them.
Jesus, Vanquish has a hard-on for killing Space Marines. The final boss has Sam facing off against Victor's remote-piloted robots, which is a bastard of a boss fight. But after finally nailing the QuickTime events, I defeat both of them. But leave it to Victor for being a sore loser, because then he pulls a Predator and nukes his suits in the station with it. Sam just barely makes it in the nick of time.
Don't go making funeral arrangements just yet.
Mission accomplished. Our ascent to power is complete. On to the next phase.
The game ends with Victor getting away and the president shooting herself in the head, which is funnier than it really should be. Again, this is what I mean by it feeling like a Verhoeven film. The end. God, what a masterpiece. I regularly revisit this game, and honestly, the more I play it, the more I appreciate it and the people who made it. It's a real gem. It's got some great combat, good level design, and a pretty enjoyable plot that doesn't take itself too seriously. What's not to love? Platinum has sadly never revisited Vanquish, and that's definitely due to the game's mostly cult status. It never really sold that well. It's got itself a small dedicated following, but nowhere near the size of even something like Bayonetta. Even at the time, I distinctly remember people mocking it. I guess because they just didn't get the humor, or they didn't like how unique it was. Remember, this was the era when normies would only play COD or Gears of Wars. Games like Vanquish were hard to break into the mainstream. And yes, similar to Lost Planet, there was that good old weird resentment towards it just because it was Japanese. Jim Sterling famously gave it a pretty scathing review. Not exactly a fan of how hard it was, and of course he attributed those problems to those pesky weird Japanese developers. They're just so bad at game design. Although the less we talk about Jim, the better. Vanquish, of course, has since gained the audience it sought after, and I'd say nowadays everyone does agree that its combat alone is one of the best of the era. Hell, I think it's one of the best third-person shooters ever made. Especially since its PC release, more people have gained an appreciation for it, which I'm happy for. The desire for a sequel keeps popping up every now and then, and even though I know Platinum has moved on, God, I would love to see a proper follow-up. Plus, the story is pretty open to one as well. But I think Platinum saw Vanquish as just a one-off. I also know the people who worked on Vanquish, especially Shinji Mikami, aren't at Platinum anymore. So it'd probably be spearheaded by a different team, combined with the fact that it's 13 years later. The window for a good sequel has likely already been passed. The older adult part of me is happy with just one good title. Just having a solid little experience is good enough for me. But the naive, childlike part of me would love to see this turn into a franchise. Seriously, having Vanquish given the full Bayonetta trilogy treatment would have been a dream come true. Because there's so many ways to take this universe and its characters. In fact, it's kind of neat to see how Vanquish might have inspired Platinum's other games later down the line. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance has a bunch of stylistic choices that are ripped straight out of Vanquish. There are many parts of Vanquish that feel like Platinum prototyping that game instead. It's neat to see little traces of DNA like that. But yeah, will we get a Vanquish 2? Probably not. Is Vanquish 1 still an amazing game that manages to hold its own? Absolutely. I said it at the start of the video. When you're playing Vanquish, it feels like you're playing the best game ever made. It's a feeling that carries you through the entire single player. If you're into fast-paced shooters and you enjoy a little bit of cheesy military science fiction, and especially if you enjoy Platinum's other games, then Vanquish is a must-buy. I think it's one of their best titles, and it's probably one of the best titles of the entire 7th gen. Because despite its small blemishes, it's an amazingly polished and streamlined experience. Amazing to play and easy to get immersed in. And goddamn, it deserved a sequel. Well, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed Vanquish as much as I did. Next episode, I'll be diving into a 1990s FPS classic. But in the meantime, take care, dudes.